Hi everyone. We're going to be looking at speciation. We've already defined the term speciation before. So we're just going to look at the different types of speciation with some related examples. As we looked at in our recording before, we said that speciation takes place when populations become reproductively isolated and there is no gene flow taking place, or simply gene flow tends to cease because the population has now adapted to their new population and can no longer adapt to their original population. There are two types of speciation that we're going to look at. The first one is allopatric speciation. This occurs through geographical isolation. So it could be a result of any form of barrier, which can be any sort of geographical barrier, such as river, sea, mountain range, which has made the population to adapt to a totally new environment. What happens is that the barrier tends to separate parts of the population, blocking gene flow. So, because there is a barrier, there is no longer any gene flow taking place between the populations. Once isolated, the population tends to accumulate genetic differences over time for the basic reason that they are adapting to their new population now. This could be the result of mutation, natural selection, or genetic drift. You may would like to go on to our previous recording to look at the definitions of mutation, natural selection, and genetic drift. So these are the ways in which the population tends to create genetic differences. Once the genetic differences are created, they are different. It results into different phenotypes for each population, which may result in reproductive isolation. So, if the two populations, the one that was the two population that has actually been separated by a geographical barrier, if these two populations were to come together, there would be differences in behavior, there would be structural differences, and this would tend to prevent mating between the two populations. Now, we would say that the two populations are now have actually isolated fully. They have got their different gene pools, and speciation has taken place. We have evolved a totally new species. So that's that happens when we have allopatric speciation. The other one that we are going to look at is sympatric speciation. In a sympatric speciation, there is no geographical isolation. This mainly takes place when there is disruptive selection with the common theme of competition, would we say. So there is competition involved in that. So basically, results from disruptive selection with competition mean being a common selecting agent. For example, in the Darwin's Galapagos finches story, where the main difference in the small birds was the size and the shape of the beaks. So when there was competition for food, and it had gone quite severe, the birds that had big adaptations allowed them to exploit a different source of food. So all the different birds, they adapted to different source of food. They changed with successive generations. They changed their size of the beak and the shape of the beak in order to adapt to the type of food that was available. For example, cracking nuts, um, getting fish from the sea, and so forth. So each bird they adapted to a certain beak shape and size. Um, this actually increases chances of survival and breeding, and they've passed on these favorable alleles of beak size, shape, whatever they had acquired with those in those generation to other generations. So we would say that these were the strong alleles or the favorable alleles, and populations on the islands they diverged. So they, because of their own type of food, they all diverged into different areas and had their own ecological niches. So their role that they played in that particular environment. So that's their ecological niche. And Their ecological niche mostly here was the type of food. We call this as niche differentiation, where they specialize on a particular type of food. So that's a niche differentiation on the basis of food. And this is an important process in sympatric speciation. Whenever there is sympatric speciation taking place, there always is a niche differentiation taking place where each species tends to adapt to a certain ecological niche that enables them to survive in a particular population.